Morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Apologize here. I'm just trying to get my audio dialed in. Okay. I think I'm there. Bill, how are we doing on a quorum? Looks like we're likely all set.
We're there on a quorum.
Okay. And I did get a message from Tom yesterday that he won't be able. He was going to try to join us if he could, but it was going to be difficult. So, John, I think you will be voting today.
Understood. Thanks.
Excellent. Before I call the meeting order, I just wanted to say Happy New Year to everyone. It's always a nice time to reflect on the new year, the past year, and prioritize for the new year. And I wish everyone a happy and healthy new year. Welcome to welcome to the first board meeting of 2025. I'll call the meeting to order at 9:02. And our first order of business today is to approve the agenda. What's your pleasure on that?
I'll move approval, Mr. Chair. Ms. Jay.
I'll second. This is Beth Fastici.
Thank you. So with that, we have a motion to approve and a second. The question is approval of the agenda. All those in favor, please signify with an aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
And all those opposed with a nay. Hearing none, the motion carries. And we'll move on to our second order of business this morning, which is approval of the minutes of the December 18th, 2024 board meeting. Would anyone like to move?
I'll move
Move on
approval,
that
Mr.
topic.
Chair. I was muted.
Sorry, Jay, I didn't see that.
I will second that. Eric.
Thank you. Thank you, Beth. So with a motion and a second, the question is on approval of the minutes of the December 18th, 2024 board meeting. With all those in favor of approving the minutes, please signify with a yes.
Eric, I'd like to make a note about the minutes.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry, Bruce. I didn't catch your hand raised. Certainly, any discussion is appropriate before taking the vote. So please.
Thanks, Eric. On the second page in item 4, where it says I asked about how other divisions would be involved in technical and cyber assessment, I'd just like that to be a note added or a part added to clarify that I was talking about other divisions of the Agency of Digital Services, not other divisions of perhaps the Treasurer's Office or other agency. That's what I was talking about, ADS. So I'd like that to be added.
We will make that revision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the question is actually the minutes with the proposed modification by Bruce. All those in favor, please signify with a yes.
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 All those opposed with a nay. Hearing none, the motion carries. The minutes are approved. The third order of business this morning is public comments. I do see some names here that that I don't recognize off the top of my head. So with that, if any member of the public would like to make a comment this morning, please raise your hand, and I'm happy to recognize you, and we can provide an opportunity for comment. I'm not seeing any hands go up, so I'm just going to give it another couple seconds here. And seeing none, I think we can move on to our fourth order of business this morning, which is a presentation from VPIC. With that, I'm happy to turn the floor over to see Tom and Eric in the office. So I'll turn the floor over to you, and however you choose to present. Please feel free. The floor is yours.
All right, thanks, Eric, and Happy New Year. We didn't have. I don't think we had a formal presentation. We're sending in our annual report to the legislature next week, so we do have that, and we can send that out to members. It's, I think, a good read. I think it highlights our performance and our changes that we've made, including. I'll highlight a couple things. Our investment return over the past fiscal year was about 10.2%, so we were well above the 7% assumed rate of return. Our 5-year average now is about 7.9%. So you're looking at we've been above the 7% threshold now for a 5-year average number. And the third piece I'd highlight is VPIC was rated #1 in the country in regards to private equity returns over the past 10-year numbers. So there's some real positive news, I think, coming out of VPIC. I think we're doing our part to help meet the pension obligations. Obviously 62 cents of every dollar spent come from investment returns. So it's vitally important that we maintain the focus on VPIC. Before I turn it over to Eric, I think the priorities that we're looking for going into the current legislative season will be addressing, I think the comp study that we put forth a couple years ago that the legislature asked us. I think it's timely. We've added into our budget a little bit so we can incrementally add and protect our staff a little bit better. We are in the 10th percentile in regards to pay for comparable roles in a pension fund. So I think we do have person risk, and we have flight risk, particularly since we only have 3 people in our staff. But with that, I'll turn it over to Eric if you have any highlights, or if you wanted to bring anything up on VPIC, and then answer anyone's questions going forward. But thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Tom, and good morning, everybody. Happy New Year. I will share screen quickly here. And we did share with you all, I think we sent out a copy of our draft annual report. We'll be filing this likely today or tomorrow. The executive summary is worth a read. I think Tom did a good job of summarizing it. But what I really wanted to focus on for especially some of the newer folks is this section at the back where we talk about how we think about investing here at VPIC. The first one being simplify. There are only 4 of us on the team, had been 3. We now have an accountant. And we've reduced the level of complexity in the portfolio to a level that the 4 of us can underwrite and understand, and that the commission can understand. We have regular and ongoing discussions with our consultant as to whether this level of complexity is appropriate to maximize returns. And if we, at some point in the future, we deem that we need to dial up complexity, we'll simply do that and add staff and put the right mechanisms in place. But to date, this approach has paid off for us as reflected in our performance. You'll note in our executive summary, our 5-year returns are above median for the 4th year in a row now. Reducing fees, this was one of Tom's big initiatives when he became chair 10 years or so ago. We've built upon that. We've reduced a lot of the active management, especially on the public market side of the portfolio. Those managers that we terminated simply weren't adding value above and beyond their fees. We've indexed a large portion of stocks and bonds within the portfolio and have really been focused on private markets where we think the markets are much less efficient than the public markets, and that allows nimble players like the managers with whom we do business to outperform, and they've done that. Our outperformance in the private equity program, inception to date, is about 1,000 basis points over the equivalent public markets. Underwrite everything again. Understanding what each investment manager does is critical. Understanding how their strategy and their approach fits into the overall VPIC strategy is critical. We know that not all of our managers will be winners every quarter, but when they are lagging or they are having a problem, we don't want to be surprised, and we rarely are. We understand what they're doing. We understand when we'll like it and when we won't like it. Talk a little bit about private markets, illiquidity premium. We believe it does increase returns, and our results have shown consistently that it does. We've talked a lot about reducing fees. The goal in and of itself is not to reduce fees. The goal in and of itself is to maximize returns net of fees. So in private markets, you will see we are paying higher fees than in public markets. But importantly, those fees are generating significant outperformance. Again, 1,000 basis points of outperformance in a private equity program since inception, and that's net of all fees. And then balancing the illiquidity in the program, certainly to the extent you can add illiquidity to the portfolio, whether it's private equity, private credit, or non-core real estate, we expect that to increase returns. That is not an infinite trade-off, though. At some point, illiquidity becomes too big of a barrier and hinders your ability to meet current obligations like annuity payments or capital calls. So we monitor liquidity very, very closely. We spend a lot of time on pacing our capital market or private market commitments. Every year, we do an in-depth study with our consultant to take a look at how our past assumptions have played out, how our ability to meet current obligations has played out, and how much illiquidity we can tolerate going forward. We then pace our commitments to new funds as we proceed. This last point I really mentioned with regard to the private markets. At the end of the day, this is about generating net returns in excess of fees, outperforming the equivalent public market indices. We're convinced we're doing that. The data bears it out. We spend a lot of time working with our consultant to understand what opportunities lie ahead on the horizon and make sure we're positioned to take advantage of them and invest in new themes and new trends. We've talked about the clean energy transition. We think that is a once-in-a-lifetime disruption that we're investing in, and we think we're well positioned to do that. If I could unshare screen here. Happy to take any questions. Covered a lot of ground there. I know there's a lot happening in capital markets, especially with the incoming new administration, but happy to take any questions or give you a color on what we're doing. Jay.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about the private equity assets and what degree of liquidity do you have? How long are those commitments?
So typical private equity commitment is a 12-year fund life that may have one or two-year extensions. We have shortened that duration somewhat by investing pretty heavily in secondary funds. So in a secondary fund, you're buying existing private partnership interests on the secondary market, often at a discount. But what we like about them, certainly we like the discount, but what we like about them is having transparency on the assets that are actually in that fund. When you commit to a new private equity fund, it's just a promise and a plan to invest the dollars, as they're called. When we're investing in secondaries, we can actually see what we're buying. The managers that we work with can underwrite what's in there. They know the funds, they can price them. And if we can buy good assets at a reasonable valuation, that gives us a shorter time horizon. Private credit has a shorter time horizon than private equity as well. It's typically a 6 to 7 year fund. Those loans are floaters, so we don't worry about interest rate risk typically there. In the infrastructure space, those can be longer lived assets, but we're balancing the duration of those with our needs for liquidity. So currently, we've 11% of the fund targeted to private equity, 11% to private credit, 2 or 3 to infrastructure and real estate. So less than a third of the fund committed to illiquid assets. The program is now a mature program, so we do have the program is essentially self-funding when it comes to meeting capital calls to new funds.
We also, at VPIC, we also every year look at a liquidity analysis of what the different plans require in terms of cash flow. In addition to that, we have the contribution from the state to meet the ADEC, which comes in every July. So we have a lot of flexibility in that regard, particularly with our public markets being extremely liquid, both on the bond side and the S&P 500 indices that we own. So from a liquidity perspective, that is very important. We don't want to ever get caught in a position where our private stuff causes us to have to sell in a down market. And so we are, I think, well positioned to that. And our consultants understand that in regards to our pacing model for private equity investments.
On top of that, we do an annual asset allocation study where we bring in the actuarial valuations of the plans and think about outgoing cash flows and demographics of the plans to revalidate those strategic asset allocation targets every year.
Perfect. Wonderful. Thank you.
Bruce.
Good morning, and thank you for this overview. My question is about your brief comment regarding VPEC staff. I just want to verify I heard it correctly. You said that our staff are in the top 10 compensation, but there's still a little bit of a flight risk.
Bottom 10%.
The bottom 10%. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense to me. So my follow-up question would be,
comp is bottom.
Yeah, performance top quartile, comp is bottom 10 percentile.
Okay.
And that was the legislature asked us to do a comp study as part of this VPIC independent process through Act 75. And so it's an interesting report. I think it highlights the problems that could occur, particularly in an environment where this business is extremely remote oriented. And so people who live in California can do what Eric does and Katie does. And I don't think we have any immediate flight risk concerns, but the problem is if we do lose one or two, how do we replace them? And so we'd like to address that issue with the legislature and come up with like maybe a 5-year plan to get to maybe the 50th percentile. So people feel the benefit of working here both, and they feel rewarded for what they do for the state of Vermont. Because I'd argue having and I'll give you an example. A number of years ago, Eric came to VPIC and recommended us to eliminate this fund, Allianz Structured Alpha Fund. The VPIC didn't really understand what the fund was made up of. That was against our consultant recommendation. It was a best pick by our current consultant at that time. And so we really went out on a limb to actually say, okay, let's terminate that manager. Fast forward to the COVID crisis, and that fund went bankrupt. And so a fund that was marketed on Wall Street as an umbrella on a rainy day, basically went to zero. And Blue Cross Blue Shield in Vermont had a ton of that in their portfolio, and they suffered significant losses. So the benefit having an internal staff or professional staff at VPIC, I think, is essential to the state of Vermont, and maintaining that and rewarding that accordingly. I'm not necessarily we're ever going to be in the top quartile on comp, but if we can become more competitive, we can attract and maintain. And if our ending up staff level ends up being 1 or 2 more, we can have a little bit more depth to the existing staff level. And so that's the priority I think I want to bring to the legislature this year. It's not necessarily urgent right now, but it could become urgent, just with 1 or 2, retirements, or and I hate to put Eric on the spot, but it could seriously undermine the process at VPIC. So hopefully that answers your question, but we are in the bottom 10th percentile in regard to comp.
Great, thank you for the explanation. I look forward to following that. It's important that we keep that knowledge here because it affects so many people in the retirement systems.
Thanks, Bruce.
Just a comment on that last discussion. That is a problem all across state government, and that the people of the state of Vermont can't afford to have the best and brightest at the highest rates of compensation. We're a small state. We have limited resources. And so you're talking about bringing up the staff at VPIC and making sure they're appropriately compensated. I absolutely support that. But at the same time, you create a tension of internal equity concerns in relation to other state employees who also are very skilled, very knowledgeable, very dedicated, perform very well, and are not compensated much higher than your team is. So um,
No, understood.
it's a concern.
It is a concern. I'd argue that there's probably no department in the state that could cause a $1 billion hole with a market drop. And so I would argue that it is essential that to look at that, not necessarily become the highest priced, but to be competitive so we can compete with maybe not the top tier, but somewhat in the middle of the road, so we can make sure that our investment process is maintained and consistent over a long time frame.
John.
Hi, you mentioned in passing a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I'd just like you to expand on that a little bit. Was it clean energy? And if so, and we're having an investment opportunity there, what are we divesting from, and what is the pace of that divestment?
So when you think about the clean energy transition, there's a global need to move away from fossil fuels. There are opportunities to invest in clean energy. There are opportunities to invest in the electric grid. There are opportunities to invest in AI and data centers that will speed the transition. There are also opportunities to invest in cleaner burning fossil fuels. The reality is we're stuck with fossil fuels for likely decades because we just don't have enough renewables capacity to power the global economy. Our role, we believe in that, is to work with all of these companies, whether it's a clean energy company or a traditional fossil fuel company, to make sure they're making the right investments in transitioning to a cleaner burning, a cleaner, lower carbon economy. We are specifically not divesting of any companies unless we've deemed that their actions are leading them to a lower valuation, lower cash flow, lower profitability in the future. There's been a lot of talk about divesting of these fossil fuel companies. And there have been a lot of special interest groups that want to punish the fossil fuel companies. And we admit it feels good to punish a fossil fuel company when they step out of line or do something that we believe is not consistent with our best long-term interest as fiduciaries and long-term investors. The problem with that approach is that walking away from those companies, you're simply selling off your shares or your proxy votes to other less responsible companies. Selling off those proxy votes gives up your say in how those companies are run. So we spend a lot of time engaging with boards of directors of these publicly traded companies. Good example is fossil fuel companies operating in the Bakken region, doing fracking and extracting natural gas. We've had success in motivating these companies to reduce their flaring of methane. If you know anything about CO2 emissions, methane is 80-something times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. So to the extent we can incentivize these companies to reduce flaring of methane, not only is less carbon spewing into the atmosphere, but these companies become more profitable because they can capture the methane and use it in industrial processes. Further, divesting of these companies does indeed, we believe, lower their share prices. The problem with that is that when a company faces a declining share price, it faces an increasing cost of capital. That increasing cost of capital typically motivates such companies to become more short-term focused, and we believe would force some of these industrial companies or fossil fuel companies to essentially invest more in the old ways because it's less costly and produces shorter-term gains, but giving up long-term gains, long-term appreciation, and long-term incentives. So as we think about investing in the energy transition, it's a broad approach. We have some investments in clean energy. We have investments in clean infrastructure. We're maintaining our investments in the fossil fuel companies and indeed working with them to make sure they're investing in a cleaner transition. If you think about this list of what's called the carbon 200 fossil fuel companies, the companies with the largest reserves of fossil fuels, 15% of those companies are also the largest investors in renewable energy. So we think it's important that we understand the companies that we're investing in, that we engage with them to make sure they're investing in their future so that their future returns, valuations, cash flow, profitability, et cetera, continue to improve, and that they're well positioned to transition us to a clean economy. From a scope standpoint, it's the big utilities, it's the big energy companies, it's the big industrial companies that have the scope and scale to lead us into a clean economy, we believe. The venture capital portfolio companies that are creating these new technologies, these are great and these are definitely needed. but these little limited partnerships just don't have the scale to do it. There's a fund that we've been talking with that, for example, produces the hardware that sits atop the mechanisms out in the Balkan region to capture that methane. Great technology enables those fossil fuel companies to capture this and resell it. But that little partnership in and of itself is not going to drive the energy transition. The technologies that these companies are creating will be part of the transition, but we need companies with scope and scale to lead us through it.
Thank you for that very thorough explanation. I hope this is being recorded because I can listen to that again and try to absorb more of it. If I'm allowed to follow up, the reason I asked about timelines is I think we were given a presentation at the Vermont State Employees Association board about legislative pressures to divest, and that was really the motivation for the question about timeline. So I'll maybe revert to the chair. Is there pressures outside of the commission's feelings to divest earlier than we otherwise would have?
Past couple of years there have been, and so I'm hopeful that there won't be legislative initiatives this year. We're getting more collaborative work in terms of working with our policies, our internal policies at VPIC versus mandating legislation. The problem with legislation is it forces things that could have unintended consequences. And the biggest unintended consequences would probably be we'd have to scale back our private equity portfolio, which, by the way, as I said earlier, is the biggest driver of our investment return over the past 5 years. Not because they have fossil fuel companies in their investment portfolios. If we did a study of it, they had 0 assets of that billion and change of how much we have in private equity. There was no fossil fuel companies that were on that list. The problem is contracting, and the problem is becoming in and being able to participate. They're not going to change the contracts because one legislature in the state of Vermont mandates a certain investment policy. The private managers, quite frankly, just won't let us into the funds that we've been blessed to be able to access at our scale and size. So I'm hopeful there won't be legislative pressure this year. I have not heard of any specific ones. If there is, we'll obviously bring up these same issues that we brought up last year and the year before. And I do think we have a little bit more support and understanding for our collaborative approach on a policy-driven investment style that leaves it to VPIC to come up with the right process, whether it's using our voting power, whether it's garnering support from other institutions to sort of pressure companies, but more working behind the scenes instead of putting in legislation. The last thing you want to have is legislation that is very difficult to get rid of. I think we still have some legislation on the books here in Vermont in regards to the IRA and Irish investments, which I think becomes very difficult. You have to go through the legislative process to remove it, and that takes multiple years. And I just don't think investing and legislation sort of meld very well together because of the dynamic nature of it. So I'll forcefully argue against it again if we need to. But I have not heard of any specific legislation as of this date, but we'll keep you informed on that.
At the legislature's request, we studied this issue extensively. We hired an external investment consulting firm, Makita, to look at what's happening in the fossil fuel industry and what's the best way to maximize returns and facilitate the transition to a low carbon economy. They looked at 4 options. Number 1 was essentially do what we're doing. Number 2 was divest of fossil fuels. Number 3 was decarbonize our portfolio. Number 4 was work to decarbonize the global economy using our portfolio. And essentially they said divesting of fossil fuels is expensive and will reduce your returns. Focus on options 3 and 4, decarbonize your portfolio, but more importantly, focus on option 4, decarbonize the global economy. That's really what we're trying to do. There are a number of funds that have said, well, we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050. And our view of that is that's really a cop-out because it's so far away. Nobody knows how they're going to get there. And nobody knows what the timeline looks like. What we're doing instead is working with companies to make sure they're investing in the transition, monitoring available and upcoming technologies that will allow us to decarbonize the portfolio and monitor our progress towards that along the way. When we feel comfortable to set a date, we're happy to do so. But to pick a date that's 25 years in the future just doesn't motivate anybody to do anything right now. That's where our proxy votes come in. We need to work with these companies to make sure they're taking this issue seriously, to make sure they understand we're reasonable investors, but we have high expectations. We're not looking to make a political statement. We're looking to maximize our returns and make sure they're acting responsibly with our capital. They're stewards of the capital of the members and beneficiaries of the three statewide pension plans, and we think they ought to take that as seriously as we do. Eric.
Thank you, Eric and Tom. So I just wanted to follow up with a question to maybe put some additional perspective on John's question. I think that was a great answer of sort of the general approach. Just to dig into what's actually in the portfolio, I was going to ask about the Makita study that showed essentially fossil fuels in our alternative investment portfolio is essentially nil. To the extent they do exist, they're largely in our index funds, correct? So
That's correct.
What exists outside of that? And then second, I was just wondering if you could provide a little bit of color on the investments that we have actually made into clean energy.
Sure. So the exposure across the portfolio is not material. I think it was
3%
across the total portfolio. Would you say 3%?
3%.
I forget the number, but it's a small number. Where we're investing in clean energy is in a couple of places. On the private credit portfolio, we are making loans to companies that are transitioning through the company. So the fossil fuel companies have said, we need capital to make this transition. We're happy to provide that capital if they're making progress and if the returns are sufficient to justify the risk appetite. We have some commitments to clean energy infrastructure funds. So we made a commitment to an infrastructure fund, I think it's called CIP, that invests solely in clean energy infrastructure. We are investing in brownfield companies that essentially take brownfields and bring new supply of renewables online. We've looked at wind investments. We've looked at solar investments specifically. Haven't done anything there yet. We may at some point in the future, but we're looking at essentially any opportunity for clean energy. I mentioned the company that puts the hardware on top of the flaring machines and captures that methane. That company's also building catalytic converters that sit on top of natural gas mines up in the Arctic tundra. It's essentially across the whole portfolio. We've seeded a low carbon transition readiness fund with BlackRock. We have, I think, $200 million in a strategy that takes the global equity index and essentially reweights it based on within each sector, keeps the sectors consistent, but reweights the companies within each sector based on their assessment of which companies are behaving more responsibly, which companies are behaving less responsibly.
Thank you.
Gavin.
And I see Gavin has his hand raised as well.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to mention a couple other things on this. I think Eric and Tom covered the substance of it really well. And I just wanted to mention that Eric, Tom, and Katie Green, the deputy CIO, I believe is her title, and who has, many of you know, like tremendous experience in the green investing world. The three of them, myself, and a couple others from the treasurer's office had I thought a really productive, almost half a day meeting with some of the outside interest groups that have been pushing divestment in the legislature, talking very specifically about VPIC's policies and sort of educating them on those and opening those lines of communication. So, I think as Tom and Eric said, I think that was productive and cordial and led to greater understanding. And I'd echo that, I too have not heard anything about a renewed divestment push in the legislature this coming year. So
one of the things that came out of that meeting was the concept of developing a plan to decarbonize. And we're working on that now. What we've promised the committee is that we'll have a timeline for a plan by March. So we don't have a plan yet. We don't have a timeline yet. This is going to take multiple years and will evolve as we move forward. But we'll have a pretty good timeline to share with the committee in 2 months or so.
Well, thanks for that update. I didn't know those conversations had sort of the status of those conversations. I think that's a really, really helpful update, and hopeful we can talk with each other rather than have to get through the legislative process.
Agreed.
So that was a really, really good discussion there. Appreciate those questions and the responses. I don't see any additional hands raised at the moment, so I just want to give folks a moment to jump in if there are indeed questions. Not seeing any. I just thank you, Tom and Eric, for all of your hard work. I mean, it's clear from VPIC's investment returns over that 5-year time horizon being above the actuarial assumed rate of return that you guys are doing a good job over there, and to get a recognition for being the number one state in private alternative investments is tremendous. Especially, you think about the conversation we had around staffing levels and compensation. Kudos. Well done.
Thanks, Eric, and we'll keep in touch, over the year. And if you need us for anything specific, we'll come back to your future meetings. But thank you.
Thank you very much for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
So with that, with conclusion of the VPIC presentation, that brings us to our next order of business, which is the fiscal year 2026 budget overview. Tim, are you taking this, or is someone else gonna lead this?
Yeah, I'm gonna just make a couple comments at the beginning, but then I'll turn it over to our finance and operations team. So often when I'm discussing our accomplishments and what we're doing in the retirement division, I'm talking about just the retirement division that Nicole and I manage. But in the treasurer's office, we have more folks, in our operations team are folks that while Jeremiah, our CFO, oversees that group, they do a lot of services for the retirement systems. They manage our budget process, they do our financial statements, and are an instrumental part of the team that administers the retirement plans. So Jeremiah, John, and George have overseen the budget process for us this year, and I'm going to turn it over to them to provide a walkthrough of the budget. A couple high-level points that I'd just like to make is that this year we have the way that we represent a few items has changed from years past. For those longtime retirement system budget followers, in the past we had investment components a little bit more front and center, and you still see a vestigial line up top where there are no expenses. That has taken some time to work off. I presume that won't be on there next year. We roll through VPIC's entire budget allocated to the systems in one go. So we've changed around a couple of those lines where different costs go to make it more intuitive, so we can understand what we're seeing. But as you'll see for this year, the all-in budget increase is 7.2%. That comes largely from staffing, salary benefit costs on the staffing side. It comes also from a few of the initiatives regarding third-party services, like our hosting contract with LRS, our legal services contract with outside counsel, and some actuarial costs. But I'll turn it over to Jeremiah, George, and John to walk through the details of the budget. And at the end of this, we would be requesting, we're happy to answer any questions, and then requesting a motion to approve the budget.
Sure.
Thank you.
I can give an overview. Does everyone have the budget presentation in front of them? Right. So
Yes.
in the interest of time, the thing that might make the most sense is if I just sort of point out some of the major variances from the prior year budget, and then open it up to questions. So at the top of the budget there, you see that the VPIC administrative support line is up 2%. That line, of course, is the expenses that we pay to VPIC for investment services, and this would be VSERS share of the budget. So that, the entire VPIC costs are allocated across the three DB plans. And this is the cost that is allocated to VSERS in concordance with the proportional share of the assets that are managed in this plan. So that 2%, represents the increase of proportional share of the increase in the VPIC budget. You'll see that the actuarial line is up 16,000 or 13%. And if you'd like more detail on that, Tim is probably the better person to speak to that. But this is obviously the line where we budget for our cost for Siegel. And my understanding is that there are some actuarial reports in addition to some of the standard reports that are due every year. There are some studies and reports that are scheduled for the coming fiscal year that are budgeted there. And so that largely explains the increase. You go down to the next section, there's that agency support section. So Attorney General and auditor accounts are flat at the moment, as we don't currently expect a major increase in cost there. But you notice that the human resources line is up 10, almost 11%. Dollar figure wise, it's a very small dollar amount at $1,000, but it's a decent percentage increase. And that is the fee that we pay to the Human Resources Department and state government. And we frankly have no control over those costs. So those are dictated to us. And, the costs over there are increasing, as long with everywhere else in state government. So that is why that is going up. Going down to third-party support. So the technical and professional line is down about $9,000 or 22%. And that is largely due to, as Tim had mentioned, there was some change in geography. We took some expenses that had been budgeted in this technical and professional and moved them to some other places. The largest piece of it is there were some IT costs that were in this line, and those are now under the retirement system information technology line. So you'll see that that line is up about 53%, and that is partially due to that change in geography. It's also due to, as Tim mentioned, the hosting costs for LRS and the new maintenance contract there. And then if you go down to there's the office and administrative support section. So you'll see that there is an administrative support line, and it says that it is decreasing by negative 5.85%. And then below that, you'll see the administrative support OPEB line. And what both of these lines represent is the cost that the retirement systems are paying back to the treasurer's office, essentially, for the staff time that is, if all the staff in the treasurer's office, a portion of their, whoever works on the retirement systems, a portion of their salary and benefits is allocated to this line, and that is paying those costs. And so this year we broke out between the OPEB and the DB plans. The administrative support OPEB line is now we are allocating to the OPEB plans a portion of the costs of the labor that is being used there. And so it's a little bit funny in the spreadsheet that you see that the top line, the administrative support, is down, negative 5%. And then you've got the administrative support OPEB doesn't have a percentage because there's no percentage change per se because there was no amount last year, but you can see that increase of 219% for the administrative support OPEB, and then the decrease of 79,000 for the administrative support. And so if you take those two together, that really represents the increasing costs of staff, and it roughly is about 10% year over year if you take the combined amount and compare it to last year. And as Tim had mentioned, that is really driven by cost of living increases, scheduled step increases for staff, and then the state, of course, has seen about a 15% increase in the cost of health insurance. And then also there was an increase to the cost of our payment into the retirement system, actually, for which is based on payroll for the pension system. And so all of those salaries and benefits go into that line. And then most of the rest of the variances that you'll see in this section, so you'll see there's an insurance line, which is up about 7%, the ADS line up about 8%, the fee for space is down 7%, and then the FMS vision assessment up 13%. So those again are all charges that we're paying to other agencies and state government that we are sort of beholden to, that we really have no control over, and those are sort of dictated to us by those other departments. And then so when you put it all together, as Tim had mentioned, you're looking at an increase of the prior year budget of about 220,000, or a little bit over 7%. So that would be an overview, and then happy to open it up for questions if there's anything that anybody is interested to go into in more detail.
Thank you, Tim and Jeremiah. Any questions on the budget?
Just a comment. The human resources number looked very large when you first started talking about it, but that I noticed that it's very consistent with the Treasurer's Office personnel costs as well. So it sounds like that's a state government-wide kind of increase. So that really addresses that concern. Thanks.
It is indeed. Yes, that's exactly correct.
Yeah, I can add into that just a little bit. Sorry. Just as far as, those costs are basically allocated on employee headcount primarily. So it's based on number of employees, as well as then the cost for the Human Resources Department. Some things that go into the Human Resources Fund are actually not human resources, because in that fund, there's also the Office of Racial Equity, also the, there's another one in there that the legislature decided when funding them, we'll just kind of add that to the HRIS Human Resources Fund. So there's other things in there except for human resources, but it's primarily based on your personnel costs, and then costs that do go up in our department as well. So
thank you for that context, Beth. I also just want to say I appreciate the explanation on breaking out the administrative support for OPEB. Looking at it, I was trying to guess at what that was. It's actually a little different than what I was thinking, but it was going to be one of my questions, so I appreciate that. Some of the other elements, we've really, I think we've discussed in other contexts, whether it's the risk assessment that I imagine is in the actuarial services, and the LRS contract. So I think we have context for some of the other increases. I have a small question that's not, I don't think it's really material to the budget, but as I was looking at agency support and the different components of that, the auditor of accounts being sort of double what the other elements were, I was just curious what services the auditor of accounts provides to the office. Is that just a general support for the auditor, or are there specific functions that the auditor helps provide?
I think it's fair to say it is general. So it's the auditor of accounts. As the purview of the auditor of accounts is the state government as a whole. It is their prerogative to bill state government as a whole, and so we receive a portion of that bill. I think the only thing that I can think of that they really do directly for us is that they do, hold this, the state ACFR contract, which obviously the state treasurer's office is very, very involved in. But otherwise, I don't know that there is a whole lot of direct dealings with them. The state auditor, I guess, yeah, I think that's probably correct. There are some other things sort of not related to retirement that I guess the state auditor, participates in a little bit more directly, but it basically is, for lack of a better word, an overhead charge for us.
Thank you. It was more of a curiosity than again being material, but I appreciate that. That's helpful. Any other questions on the budget as presented?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move approval of the budget as presented.
Thank you, Jay. Is there a second?
I will second.
I'll second.
I heard Beth first, so let's mark Beth as the second, but I appreciate your second as well, Gavin. So with the motion and the second, the questions on the floor, is there any discussion? Is there any further discussion on the budget as presented? Seeing none, the question is to approve the fiscal year 2026 budget as presented. All those in favor, please signify with an aye.
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 And all those opposed with a nay. Hearing none, the motion passes, and the fiscal 2026 budget is approved by the board. Thank you, Tim and Jeremiah, for walking us through that presentation. With that brings us to sort of our penultimate item here, which is key updates on the Vermont Public Pensions Memo. I assume, Tim, you'll start. You may handle this conversation, but I'm sure you'll at least start it.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yes, I can kick it off, but I think both you were there, Beth was there, Gavin was there. So I think there's a lot of folks that can add color to this conversation. But we on Tuesday hosted a press conference, Treasurer Pichek did, to just take a step back and take a look at Act 114 and reflect on the accomplishments that has had since, the really difficult time when we were looking at it and passing that bill. That was I think back on that period, it all kind of started with the 2020 experience study, substantial increases in the unfunded liability, given the reduction in the assumed rate of return and other factors. And then, 2 tumultuous years in the legislature that ultimately led to a really, tripartisan solution of Act 114 to, what I think did 3 things. It made some changes to benefit structures. It asked more of employees, and it asked more of the state. And so Mike wanted to take an opportunity to step back, talk to some of the key players involved in the passage of that bill. So we had the union heads were there. Secretary of State Copeland Hanses was there, who was one of the co-chairs of the Pension Design Task Force. And I think it was a really positive event that, so often we're looking at the headlines of the day and what's going on now, and don't take time to step back and reflect on what we did a couple of years ago that might be working and providing value. So that was the purpose of the event. And Bill sent around some of the press coverage that came. So I'm sure you all got to see Eric Davis with his quote front and center in the Digger article. It was, I think it was a really great event to see everyone there. I'll turn it over to Eric, Gavin, others for their thoughts.
Yeah, I'll add a little bit of color because you sort of mentioned the Digger article. I didn't imagine I was going to be quoted, but I really appreciated the Treasurer's Office having that event and taking a step back and just taking a look at where we are today after Act 114. It's their funding ratios of both the pensions and OPEB were front and center in terms of the some of the exhibits at the press conference. But I also want to call attention to the savings to the taxpayer was also highlighted, and it was in excess of $5 billion. So that's a really big number in the context of the state of Vermont. Obviously, it's over time, but taking a look at all of the different stakeholders that are affected by Act 114, whether you're a member of the system or a taxpayer or you know, the employers helping to recruit and retain employees. It was, you know, it's been some time since that took effect, so I think it was really helpful to take a step back and look at where we were. I it was I appreciated the event, and it was really good conversation around the room. So I think it was very much a success. I now I see Gavin has his hand raised. Please, Gavin, the floor is yours.
Oh yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And yeah, I just wanted to echo that. I think, you know, they say it takes a village, and it really highlighted for me, like, as we were putting this together, you know, I was less a part of the history of it than many. I sort of observed it from the side as the general counsel at DFR, as then Commissioner Pichak sat on the commission. But you know, just to realize sort of all the people that we needed to invite to speak who had been part of that history and part of those negotiations, and you know, part of the you know, kind of difficult funding decisions that were made, and you know, it's a lot of money every year. Some of it comes from employees, lots of it comes from taxpayers, you know, and just thought it was really a testament to a lot of the folks that were on that commission, you know, including folks on this call, you know, that those difficult decisions were made, and that we did not, you know, I think looking back at it, you could see there's a real danger that that graph would have kept going down. And you know, there's a point at which you know, the graph goes down too far. You just you can't save it, you know. And I think it's kind of a testament to the Vermont way, for lack of a better word, in politics, that you know, we were able to turn the ship around. And I guess the only other thing I'll add is just that I think this is something that we'll do again, you know, whether it's annually or every 2 years, or you know, depending on events. But even absent some noteworthy particular event, I think it's, you know, as Eric said, it's worthwhile to do. It's worthwhile to get pensions in the news when it's good news and not bad news or surprises. So thanks to everyone who came and contributed to that, and thanks to the board for, you know, continued oversight.
I'll just add to that. You mentioned the people in the room, and Tim mentioned the tripartisan solution. There was tripartisan representation in the room as well, so that was nice to see. And I also appreciate, Gavin, the idea of, you know, revisiting this on either an annual or biennial basis, because those stakeholders are interested. You know, we had some people attend a VSEA board meeting, or a person attend a VSEA board meeting, asking about the pensions recently. When I was talking to people about the press conference, people said, "Well, what is the state of our pensions?" So it is a question that's out there, and I do, it's, you know, really important to a lot of folks. So updating people on, you know, what is the state of the pensions, I think that's an important topic. Thank you. Any additional comments or thoughts from board members? Seeing none, I think we're on to our last item of the day, which is any other business to come before the board. Does anyone have, Tim, your hand is raised, please.
Yeah, two things. Thank you, and kind of consistent, Mr. Chair, with what you were just talking about. We're starting the legislative session. There are a lot of new folks. There's a lot to learn about pensions, and so if anyone in your networks, you know, in the legislature or elsewhere, has questions, we're going to be dusting off the old Pension 101 deck to start going around. You know, we're invited in committees to make sure folks know what our pension systems are, important stats about them. But if you're getting any questions, feel free to refer those to me so I can maybe provide some materials to be helpful and either answer questions directly or help be a resource for you to answer those questions. That was one thing. And the second that I just wanted to bring up and see if it felt right to folks was a comment last meeting about thinking about in-person meetings. Bill and I were putting our heads together and we were talking to Empower. We have our next meeting is going to be one of our Empower quarterly meetings, February. And then the one after that is May. And we were thinking that May might be a good time for an in-person meeting, maybe to get on a couple of year schedule or whatnot. It might require a little bit of flexibility in the dates so that, because if Empower is coming, I'd want them to get in front of all our boards and not have to make repeated trips here. So if folks think that feels right, I'm happy to start putting together maybe a little bit of a longer meeting with maybe a training, or we're starting to think internally about what something like that could look like. Does May feel reasonable? Any thoughts, concerns there?
Bruce?
I'll just comment that I think that sounds like a very exciting opportunity for all three boards, and may the weather turns better. And somebody being in Southern Vermont, I appreciate that warmer weather for when I have to travel up there. Thanks.
Great.
Yeah, I also like the sound of that idea, and I'm appreciative of you taking that comment and considering it, and throwing something back out to the board.
Great. All right. Well, if no other comments, I'll pitch it to the other boards too, and we'll. Oh, I see Jay.
Jay.
You mentioned the possibility of combining that with some training. That sounds wonderful. I love that idea.
Yeah, we'll put our heads together and get you a proposed agenda and more formal. But as long as it feels like the right time frame, we can kind of put our heads on it a little bit more and come up with some thoughts. Get it to you at the next meeting or two.
Thank you, Tim. Any additional items to come before the board this morning?
I just had one quick one, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please, Kevin.
Thanks. So I just wanted to provide an update. Tim and I mentioned probably a couple meetings ago now that we are looking to hire an office-wide director of risk management, which we got legislative approval for last year. Tim and our director of unclaimed property, Al LaPearl, did first round interviews with, I think, 6 or 7 folks just before the holidays. And I have my last of 3 second round interviews today. We had a really strong applicant pool from where I sit. And really looking forward to getting that person on board early in the new year. And I think it'll be a real benefit across the office. And we'll let you know when we make a decision and have some.
That's excellent. Thank you for the update. Any additional items to come before the board this morning? Seeing none, or Bruce, either if you have an item or if you would like to make
I'll move
motion.
to adjourn, Eric.
Okay, all right.
I'll second that motion.
To adjourn, and Jay has seconded. This item is not up for discussion. So the question is to adjourn the meeting today. All those in favor, please signify with an aye.
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 All those opposed with a nay. Hearing none, the meeting is adjourned for the day. Thank you all for your time this morning and the discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks,
Be well, everyone.
Thanks, folks.
Take care.